Hello, everybody, and thank you all for joining us during the Lytham Partners Spring 2024 Investor Conference. My name is Roger Weiss. I'm a Vice President here at Lytham. In this presentation, we welcome Modular Medical, NASDAQ ticker symbol MODD. And with us today is their CEO, Jeb Besser. By the way, I should note that Jeb is also a money manager whose fund, Manchester Management, is the largest shareholder in Modular. Before we begin, I want to remind everyone that management is available for one-on-one meetings. If you've not already signed up, please send me an email at weiss@lythampartners.com or visit us at www.lythampartners.com/spring2024 and click on the one-on-one meeting request button. All right, Jeb, let's start. Could you please introduce yourself and give us a brief overview of the company?
Sure. I'm Jeb Besser, CEO of Modular Medical. And let's see, brief overview of the company. So the company is attempting to get cleared by the FDA and commercialize a next generation pump for the delivery of insulin and other drugs. The company was founded by Paul DePerna, who was the founder, CEO, and first employee of Tandem Diabetes, ticker TNDM, on the NASDAQ, which was, believe it or not, the latest successful entrant into the insulin pump space back in 2011. And so we think that we're going after a differentiated market because rather than competing against the big three of Medtronic, Insulet, and Tandem, we're targeting what we call the almost pumpers, people who have rejected pumping to date because pumping is either too complex, too cumbersome, or too costly for them, or some combination of those factors. And we think that's a pretty big portion of the audience because even though pumps have been out there since 1996 with Al Mann's original MiniMed, 8 out of 10 people who could be benefiting from wearing a pump are still not wearing a pump. So that's where we are.
Very good. I noted at the beginning that you were a money manager. How did you get involved originally with the company, and how did you find them?
So we were doing due diligence on another company in the wearable diabetes space, just for investment purposes, and we met Paul, who was a subject matter expert, and hired him as an expert on this other entity. The other entity completely flamed out in due diligence. There was really nothing to be done there. But while we were talking to Paul, he told us about this project that he had going on in a high-tech version of his garage, where he had spent a couple $1 million of his own money trying to design a next-generation pump, because after he left Tandem, or around the same time he left Tandem, he came to the conclusion that he had made a terrible mistake in terms of where he had positioned the original T-Slim, in that he tried to basically out Medtronic by taking a little bit of savings from the way that he was pumping insulin in the T-Slim and pouring it into more features. And he thought that there was a differentiated market that you could go after in this space by making a product that was appealing to the rest of us, let's say. A lower cost, safer, differentiated, easy to use solution for people that were intimidated by the current state of technology and the current feature set. And we found that really exciting. But we were a fund that only invested in public companies. So we bought a shell called Bear Lake Recreation, which was a snowmobile touring company in Utah when it was an operating business. And we merged Paul's little entity into it. We led the coincident funding round, and we said, you just run the business, run the R&D team in San Diego, and we'll lead every round until we go up to the NASDAQ. And we uplisted to the NASDAQ in February of 22, and I became the CEO 2 weeks after that.
Got it. So you mentioned that there are a lot of folks with diabetes who are still sticking with needles.
Yes.
Can you quantify the actual space itself? How big is the pump opportunity? And who are the current players out there? You obviously mentioned Tandem. Who else?
Yeah, so Tandem is the most recent entrant. Insulet with their Omnipod is the entrant who is the most successful right now. I would say, in terms of taking market share. They've gotten on the prescription drug reimbursement plan, which has been a great boon for them. And their product, frankly, is fairly slick in terms of how you put it on. It sits on your arm instead of having 48 inches of tubing, and so it has no tubes. They call themselves a tubeless pump. And then 40% of the market is still the venerable Medtronic MiniMed franchise that Medtronic bought from Alman for $2.4 billion way back in 03, 04. And that is the market. It's those three players. There have been a couple, Tandem just came out with a smaller pump called the Mobi, which is kind of a halfway between a patch pump and a tube-based pump. Medtronic just came out with a 780G, and Medtronic, I think, has held a lot of share because they're the only company that makes both a continuous glucose monitor and a pump, so they have pretty tight integration. And then you've got Tandem with Mobi, Insulet with the Omnipod, and Medtronic with the 670 and the 780G. And those are really the major players. Beta Bionics has a pump that just came on the market last year, or very late last year, which is very, very similar to a Medtronic in form factor, but has an easier to use but less accurate automated insulin delivery algorithm. And we think that, there's a little bit of interest in that, and that's great for us because that's if you like their automated insulin delivery algorithm, and you like their easier and you like their, but you have an issue with their form factor, you're really going to like our product, frankly. So that's really the state of the market. And just to be clear, if you think about insulin pumps and why they're applicable and why it's so important for these 8 out of 10 people who aren't on a pump yet to adopt, insulin pumps are always best-in-class care. And the reason they're best-in-class care is that they give you a slow basal drip all day long, which accounts for half of the insulin that you need. And then by allowing you to just push a button through your clothing to bolus, you'll bolus more frequently and in smaller amounts, as 100 or 200 studies have shown. And it just makes practical sense, right? Like pushing a button through your clothing you're a lot more likely to do it more frequently than excusing yourself, going to the bathroom, pulling out a vial, pulling out a syringe, and stabbing yourself. So that ease of use keeps you closer to baseline. And we know that the long-term damage from diabetes comes from these massive excursions from baseline, which are much easier to have if you're injecting a few times a day with insulin. So how big is the market? The unaddressed market? Look, there are going to be some people who will never wear a pump. There are going to be some people who just simply refuse to wear any kind of technology at all. And we acknowledge that. But we surveyed 10% of the endocrinologists and nurse diabetes educators in the United States, and we asked them, what percentage of your multiple daily injectors, and this is critical, not your current pump users. We're not trying, if you're happy with your current pump gives you great care if you're willing to spend the 30 to 60 minutes a day it takes to manage it, undergo a week-long training class to learn how to use it, and if it happens to be covered in a way that's acceptable to you in terms of insurance. But that's not really who we're addressing. We're trying to address these almost pumpers, these people who've raised their hand already and said, I want to pump, but. And when we surveyed this 10% of endos and nurse diabetes educators, they said, and we asked them, what percentage of your multiple daily injectors would you put on a product that was easier to use, less full-featured, and less expensive? They said 1 out of 4. So we size it as an initial $3 billion market at current reimbursement for the initial almost pumpers. And they don't just say 1 in 4, they literally list off 10 to 20 people who they see in their practice on a regular basis who have said, I want to pump but. And that but might be cost, it might be complexity, it might be form factor, it might be any combination of those, might be all 3 of them. But we tried to design a product that addresses as many of those concerns as we possibly can in a single product to try and appeal to as many of the this next group of almost pumpers as we can.
All right. Let me ask you kind of a harder question, which is Tandem is $1 billion plus company, Insulet's 10 billion plus, and Medtronic's 100 billion in terms of cap.
Yep.
What makes you think you can, compete with the big boys?
Well, I think you certainly can't have a Me Too product and go head to head at the kitchen table with these guys without spending $500 million and spending 10 years trying to get some kind of traction. You have to be different. You have to address a population. And remember, the Medtronic product has been around since 1996. These other guys have been on the market since 09 and 11. There are reasons that people have rejected their product. You're looking at a set of customers that have said no, no, and no to their product for 10 plus years. And what's inside their product has not changed. They might add more more complexity, more technical features, more clever buttons, more different flavors of automated insulin delivery algorithms to account for, oh, you just ate pizza. Now we're going to feather your basil based on the carbs and the tomato sauce, the cheese, and the crust. But they haven't actually addressed how they move insulin in terms of cutting cost and in terms of making it safer and making it a smoother delivery. And that's what we've tried to address is let's fix the problem in the hardware. Let's make it a two-part pump so you're not throwing away the electronics every 3 days like you are with Omnipod. Instead, ours lasts for 90 days, which makes it much easier to give you those electronics for free. Don't have a big durable component that costs a ton of money. Don't market directly to the patient. Make it sampleable so the patient can learn it themselves. And fundamentally change the way that we approach the market versus the other guys and be on a low commitment reimbursement tier like Insulet has pioneered. And fortunately, they did all the hard work on that. So, be better for the patient, be easier to learn, save the doctor time, allow them to serve a customer base that they've found doesn't like the current solutions, but they know is there because they see them all the time, and try and allow the insurers to save both the $10,000 a year that you save if you get someone to wear a pump versus multiple daily injections in terms of per life year of a patient, and allow them to save money from not taking the upfront risk that you would with the current products. Does that answer the question?
I think it does.
Okay.
Let me ask you this. We've certainly seen a bifurcation in the industry. We've certainly seen some winners, Insulet, Abbott, Dexcom, who have done quite well, and Medtronic, after doing very well after they bought MiniMed, has been losing market share, and Tandem has been kind of doing something out there. What have you learned in looking at what the winners have done or what the losers have done, and what kind of takeaways does that tell you about the market?
Well, first, let's look at the pump space. What's happened in the pump space is that people have this impression that the pump space has grown very, very rapidly. And the reality is that is not what's happened. The pump share of people with type 1 diabetes in 2006 was 32%. Today, it's 36%. You really haven't grown the market that much at all. You've seen a little bit of growth in type 2 from, call it 0 to about 10%. But you haven't, that still means 90% of the patients who could benefit from being on a pump aren't. And the reason I think that what you've seen instead is basically World War I style trench warfare, where you've had a big winner, Insulet, you've had a modest winner, Tandem, and you've had a big loser, Medtronic, who's gone from 100% share basically down to 40. And that is a totally different experience than what's happened in the adjacent space, continuous glucose monitors. You mentioned Dexcom. Dexcom came into the market in 2010 and cleaned Medtronic and Roche's clock in terms of having a better monitoring product. But then when Abbott introduced the Freestyle Libre in 2016, all the KOLs at the time poo-pooed it and said, why does anyone want this poor man's Dexcom? Because it was less accurate, it was less expensive, but they said, who cares? It's covered by insurance. It didn't have a real-time feed. You had to wave a sensor over this. You had to wave a wand over the sensor in order to get a read. And yeah, it didn't have a finger stick, but who cares? People with diabetes prick themselves all the time. And don't patients want all the alarms and the patient portal that Dexcom was going to give them, along with the better accuracy? And we've all seen what's happened. In the CGM market, Dexcom has continued to grow, but Abbott Freestyle Libre, entering 6 years after Dexcom, within 5 years had as many users and was doing as much revenue, because they're fundamentally addressing a different audience, a more casual user base. If I were to draw an analogy in the current pump space, the current pumps are like a $2,000 latte machine you put on your kitchen counter. But there's and the Dexcom is a lot like that in the CGM space. If you turn all the knobs and you pull all the levers just right, it makes a great cup of coffee. But there's no Keurig in the pump space. But in the CGM space, that's the Libre. And the Libre has been successful because they're going to give you 80 to 90% of the benefit for 10% of the work and the learning. And that's proved to be very appealing. And that's the exact segment that we're targeting, that we call the almost pumpers, and it proves, frankly, that people are willing to wear a device that's different than the current devices that are out there, and they aren't necessarily exclusive of one another. They're adjacent markets that both happen to be treating people with diabetes who would benefit from wearing a device. So I don't know if that answers the question, but that's kind of how we think about the market. Let's not go where the other guys are. Let's go where where Libre showed that you can go.
It's a classic market segmentation.
Yeah. Yep. It's market segmentation 101. That's absolutely right. Yep.
And just in terms of those continuous glucose monitors out there, how many people have monitors on them right now in this country versus pumps?
It's 4 times as many people wearing a monitor as wearing a pump.
So what does that tell you?
It tells me that market segmentation and offering people choices that they actually want is really important, rather than simply let's try and cram more and more features in to a higher and higher tech version of a product that requires a week of training. I mean, I think, one of the problems here is that endocrinologists in general don't make a lot of money. They make on average $115,000 a year. And when you only have office visits and lab tests, you see a lot of patients. And so you're kind of struggling to make ends meet. The last thing you have time for is to fill out a 200-page survey every quarter on what you think should be next in pumps. The guys that have the time to do that are the people who work at the high-end academic centers, Stanford, Mass General Hospital, et cetera. And so those are the guys. So they have a disproportionate impact on how these products are designed, and they say, well, look, my patients tend to be well reimbursed. They tend to be very tech savvy. They tend to be hyper concerned about their health. They tend to be super type A competitive people who want to excel at whatever they do, rather than just, I want to check the box and I'm already so overburdened by my diabetes that I'm just not going to spend more than another 10 minutes a day, even if it's better care that's going to benefit me 15 years down the road. And so those people drive the current design choices of the pump companies, which is why you see them get more and more feature rich and no one tries to simplify it. And if you think about it, it's the same reason that, Aston Martin doesn't have a $20,000 compact car on the market. Because, last I checked, because it's really, really hard to take features out of your brand, a lot of features, and retain any brand integrity, because you're inevitably going to disappoint your core customers who think that, okay, well, wait a second, where are my pedal shifters? Where are all the things that I want, that I expect with this product? And so I think it's very hard for them to de-feature. And that's not the direction they've gone. Instead, they've added more and more features in order to add complexity. I mean, a Medtronic MiniMed has 1,300 user configurable settings. And if you configure it wrong, you can go into a coma or die. Ours has 4. And that is why it takes 20 minutes to learn our product approximately, versus a multi-day training session for the other products. It's a different approach.
Yep. Well, clearly Insulet has demonstrated that there's a desire out there for a patch pump.
Yep.
And we've seen that Tandem and Medtronic didn't have patch pumps. And I guess about a year ago, we saw Medtronic announce a deal to buy EOFlow out of Korea for $738 million.
Yep.
And then in December, they bailed out of that deal.
Yep.
And after Insulet had sued everybody for intellectual property violations and
trade secret theft, and yep.
How should we think about Medtronic's needs, Insulet's wants in this area, EOFlow's product, and where Mod sits in the whole, current market?
Well, I think there are a couple interesting things about that proposed transaction that later was aborted. The first is, if you needed any more validation that the form factor of the future is a patch and not a tube-based pump, you should probably look at the actions of the major tube-based players, right? Because Medtronic has tried to buy EOFlow, which was a patch pump that looked an awful lot like an Omnipod. And even Tandem bought a company, AMF Siggy, out of Switzerland in December of 22, even though they said that they were, 5 years away from submitting their product to the FDA. They still, they were still buying something that looked like a patch pump form factor. So they both, and Mobi is sort of a attempt to kind of be in between the durable pumps, the durable tube-based pumps, and the patch pumps. So everyone seems to be focused on the market's telling us we need a patch pump. So that's interesting, because that is our form factor, and I think to to move away from that would be very difficult for us at this point. So we feel good about that as validation. The second thing I would say is that, when we saw that Medtronic announced that deal, I can't say that we were tremendously afraid of the prospect of competing against a Medtronic EOFlow combination, because we view EOFlow as very, very similar to an Omnipod. And in fact, clearly Insulet agrees with us that it's very, very similar to an Omnipod. So on the one hand, for them to have the original brand name in this space, Medtronic, have access to a pump that looks a lot like theirs, I could see, given that they're the only player in the market right now, that would be a little bit of a problem for them. On the other hand, it was going to take Medtronic a long time to scale this up if they did acquire it. And, the Omnipod was designed in 2001. Our COO used to work at Insulet. I'm very confident when I say that the Omnipod, because you're throwing away the entire pumping mechanism every 3 days, it is not cheap to make, and it's not easy to make. And so I think that I think EOFlow has admitted as much, that it is a hard product to make, and that scrap rates and scale are hard to come by. And so I think our focus on making a product that's not only easy to use and appropriately reimbursed and easy to train on, but also very manufacturable, because our consumable that lasts for 3 days is 12 molded plastic pieces and a coin cell battery, is a major differentiator for us in terms of manufacturability. And I think that emphasis will hold us in good stead. So I guess the very short answer is, we think it's interesting, because 1, it's a validation of our form factor, and 2, it's a validation, and we think it's a validation of where the space is going, and also what a not yet cleared in the US pump that had less than 5,000 users in total might be worth to a large player. Because at the end of the day, this is a stock, and I make $1 as CEO, and I'm fundamentally not in this for the salary for that reason. And so I think, we're interested in what's going to offer the best risk-adjusted return for the shareholders. And if that's a strategic exit at some point, great. And if we have to launch the product ourselves, well, that's not something we're afraid to do, because our launch strategy is fundamentally different, and based on detailing physicians and nurse diabetes educators, and not based on detailing individual patients like what's currently practiced today in the space.
And maybe you could just be a little more specific there, and just talk about how the current pumps out there are detailed or not detailed to the market, and where you think you could do something else.
So the way the current pumps work is that, in terms of their marketing, is that you go to your endocrinologist and say, I want to go on a pump. And then your endo makes you keep a diary for 60 days of all your diabetic events, how many carbs you had, how many units of insulin you took, what your blood sugar readings were, et cetera. And they're not doing that because you're a good or a bad candidate clinically. If you require multiple daily injections of insulin, you are a good candidate clinically. They're doing that as a pure proxy for compliance, because they're so afraid that they're going to buy you a $4,000 paperweight, a pump that you'll use for a week or two and say, oh my God, this is so much work, and you're going to put it on the bathroom shelf and go back to needles. And we think that happens a lot, actually, in the pump space. And so after you finish the 60 days, your endocrinologist says, congratulations, you're eligible for a pump. Here are the business cards for Medtronic, Tandem, and Insulet. Call the rep and they'll come to your house, and they literally detail you at your own kitchen table about why you should, the features and benefits of their pump, and why you should pick it. And then they take the pump with them, because if they leave it with you, one of 2 things might happen. You either have been left with a $4,000 piece of durable medical equipment that you might never bring back, because all current pumps are self-fill. So you buy the insulin separately from the pump, or in the case of Insulet, you usually unless you're willing to accept a very, very old handset and not having any of your apps update, they give you a subsidized second lockdown cell phone. But that's $1,000 piece of equipment that they then have to amortize. And if you don't bring it back, that's a problem for them. And the other problem is because all three of the current devices require multiple days of training in order to use them safely. If I leave you with the product, you might fill it up yourself and decide, hey, I can do this. And without adequate training, you could seriously injure or kill yourself. And so you go back to the nurse diabetes educator and say, which one of these is going to work for me? And, a lot of nurse diabetes educators are honest brokers who understand the categories of patients that are capable of using the current pumps. And one of the leading nurse diabetes educators in the United States told me, when someone says they want to go on a pump, I ask them to pull out their cell phone. And if what comes out of their pocket is a flip phone or an early model smartphone, I say, not to channel Jack Nicholson, you can't handle a pump. And the reason they say that is if you've ever tried to teach someone how to use technology that they're not up for, that's going to be an incredibly frustrating experience, and they're not going to get paid nearly enough to manage that headache. And the patient's not going to have a great experience either. So we want to go into those nurse diabetes educator training practices, of which there are only 200 to 250 who specialize in teaching people how to use pumps, and be that fourth option on the table when someone says, I have friends who use that. No. I have friends who use that. No. I tried that earlier in life. No. Okay, this one's different. Try this. Watch a 10-minute YouTube video, take this home, take this sample home, right? With a dummy cartridge, and see if this might work for you. And if it doesn't work for them, then all we've lost is a $34 sample. But if we can get them to convert, then we've saved the healthcare system a lot of money. We've eliminated the upfront risk, and we've given something to the patient and to the nurse diabetes educator who feels they've done something finally in order to give someone better care.
Got it. Could you bring the sample or the device back up to the
camera? So this is the control. This is what we call the controller. This is the piece that lasts for 90 days that we give you for free. And if we give you a sample, it would be this plus a dummy cartridge and then a quick start guide. And then this is the consumable. So as you can see, it's 12 molded pieces of plastic and a coin cell battery, and then it has this little pigtail off to the side. Why did we do a pigtail instead of what Insulet has done with the auto injector underneath? Well, there are a couple reasons. One is that the most likely area you're going to get an occlusion is at the point of injection. And since once you fire the auto injector in an insulin Omnipod, you can never fire it again. And if you remove the pump, you lose all the insulin inside if it's during your 3 days of wear, and insurance won't buy you another pod for 3 days. So you're going to be out of pocket if something like that happens. That's a big problem. 2, this allows it to be removable. You can put it on pause and take it off, not just to clear a jam, but because there's a social or a physical reason in terms of comfort that might help. And 3, using this design obviously saves a lot of money. And 4, this holds 3 mLs of insulin. Omnipod only holds 2. Tandem and Medtronic also hold 3 mLs of insulin, and 25% of all type 1s and 65% of all type 2s can't get through 3 days on 2 mLs. They need 3. And so if you're going to wear a pod, you're either rich enough to be able to be out of pocket every 3rd day for another pod, or you can't wear a patch pump until this gets on the market.
The modular in the company's name is because those 2 pieces actually fit together.
Correct. Yeah, these click together. So you fill this up with insulin. You put a patch, an adhesive patch, or a Velcro strap. We can do either on your arm, and you use a spring-loaded injector to put a needle set in next to where you're going to anchor this. You snap these together with the complexity of about a McDonald's Happy Meal. Well, let's see if I got the light. Yeah, here we go. See, it's got a light. It's real. And so then you click it into the pad, you click it into the adhesive pad, and you click this on top, and away you go. And then you prime it, and you start it using a sequence on the button. a combination sequence on the button. So, you know, push it 3 times, pause, push it another 3 times, that unlocks it, and then you enter how many units of insulin you're gonna give yourself. And so we use a combination, so you can't like fall asleep on the couch and then be pressing the button down and accidentally deliver, you know, 50 units of insulin to yourself. So, you know, basic mechanical safety on that. And as a result of having a button on this instead of an insulin Omnipod, hold on, hold the Omnipod up just so you have a comparison. So this is a very slick device, but it doesn't have a button. There's no way to manage this if you don't have another device on your body that's actually allowing you to control this. You can't bolus, you can't pause it, you can't do anything without this other device. If your device managing this runs out of power, you are out of luck. So everything our users, potential users, told us over and over again, I just want to be able to do everything with the button. You can have an app on your phone that says it's working. You just bolused yourself. You probably don't want to do that again. Or, you know, give me a refresher on how to put this thing together if I need it, or what this beeping noise or what this alarm means. But don't make me dependent on having another device. I'm already burdened enough as it is with all my diabetes stuff.
From a business standpoint, because ultimately Modular Medical is a business,
Yep.
The modular part gives you a competitive advantage, doesn't it?
Well, sure. You know, using the pumping electronics are an expensive piece of the equipment here, and so to be able to use them for 90 days instead of 3 is a huge cost advantage. It's why, you know, even if EOFlow was 10% cheaper to make than an insulin Omnipod, it would be hard for them to compete with us because of that reuse of the electronics. 1, 2. Because our product was designed in the parts list was picked out in 2015, 2016, and not in 1996, 2001, or 2007, respectively, like the big 3, we have access to electronic componentry that frankly didn't exist back then, that largely comes from cell phones and drones. And those are the most optimized, efficient electronic supply chains the world has ever seen. So we benefit from the scale of those industries rather than the scale of being a bespoke custom medical device that was, you know, from 30 years ago. They're pumping with a Rolex, we're pumping with a Casio, is the best way to put it. And because of that, at scale, obviously not the first couple thousand units, but at scale, we think we would have a 50% cost of goods advantage over a one-piece single-use pump like an Omnipod.
It's a big difference.
Yeah. Well, and that difference in cost allows us to do things that, frankly, they would struggle to do, like first month free, copay buy downs, point of prescription couponing, and bigger rebates to the PBM to encourage them to put us equal or preferred to them day one. As our survey of a third of the insurers in the United States, the commercial insurers in the United States, suggested they would if we gave a 20% rebate.
So just all those sales, all those regular sales and marketing things that everybody else in med device land already does.
Yes.
Except this industry.
That's right. That's right. This is a strange industry in terms of a strange segment in terms of the way that people have marketed to date. But look, it's not because they're stupid. It's because their marketing decisions to date have been fundamentally driven by the design of their products, and their products are wonderfully designed engineering solutions from a long time ago to a very nasty technical problem, which is how do you deliver insulin where you can never fail open, because if that 2 to 3 mLs of reservoir of insulin all dumps into you at the same time, you're dead in 2 minutes. So you can never fail open. You're pumping it smaller than a 200th of the drop with roughly single-digit accuracy. You can't overly agitate the mixture because it's the main preservative in insulin is zinc-based. And when you agitate a zinc-based mixture, it clumps like crazy, which jams the pump. And you have to do it all in a form factor and a cost that people can wear. So even though the FDA, because of this issue of fail open, you know, outcomes very, very bad, doesn't allow a human trial except for a usability study, this is a really nasty technical problem. And it's a really nasty technical problem where it's very easy to run down the wrong rabbit hole and only at the end realize you're never going to get there in terms of accuracy or safety. And that's why that's why there are only a few pumps on the market.
Got it. Well, since we're have a limited amount of time today, let me move on and ask you another question, which is in January, you submitted your device for a 510K predicate approval. Where do we sit? And kind of what's your timelines and should we be thinking about approvals as in like new drugs, or is our devices different?
Devices are very fundamentally different. So we're a 510K predicate device application. And in fact, every device in this space was a 510K predicate device application. None of them did a human trial. All of them were a pure series of mechanical torture tests along with a usability study. And they all have the same basic label. You can add other things to the label like ACE designation or pediatric or what have you, but they all basically have the same label. So it's not like the drug process in that you go to the FDA, you say, I did this 100-patient study, and the FDA says, oh, you know what? I thought about it some more and you need another 200 patients. That doesn't happen. It has their objections or their questions have to be all around how are you equivalent or not equivalent to your predicate device. And in our case, our predicate device is the Tandem T-Slim, which was designed from the ground up by our founder. There's very little about the Tandem T-Slim that we don't know. Literally, Paul picked out the parts list. Paul got it through the FDA. He's intimately familiar with that application. So we have to be mechanically, from a safety and accuracy standpoint, we have to be equivalent to the Tandem T-Slim that was cleared in 2010. And so the FDA's questions have to be around how we are or aren't equivalent. And along with a healthy dose of, these are things that have made pumps go bump in the night in the last 30 years that we know about that you don't. And so have you imagined this scenario and have you done a test for it? And so we submitted on January 19th. We got FDA questions on March 15th. And the way the predicate device process works is you get your questions, your first set of questions, and then you have up to 180 days to answer them, or you time out and you go back to zero and you have to resubmit. So we are in that 180-day period. And, all we've said about the questions is they're broadly within the range of our expectations. And we think that we will comfortably be able to respond to them by the 180-day mark. After that 180-day mark, after we respond to the questions, whenever that is, the FDA has 30 days to get us a second set of questions. And you can hear you can see that is a much shorter period of time because the questions are supposed to be getting more narrow and more focused as this is the second set. After that second set of questions, then we have another 180 days to respond to those questions. And after those responses, then we go interactive, meaning they can either clear us immediately or they can ask us more questions, but with very short turnaround times with the stated goal of clearing us with the least amount of commercial burden possible as fast as possible. So that's the process. How long it will take, it's hard to know. The average time for clearance from submission to final clearance in this division on a predicate device the last 2 years has been 159 days. Now, are we average? No, I don't think we're average. I think we're worse than average. And the reason I say that is that we are a complex, class 2 medical device. There are things in that average that are simple auto injector pens where there aren't a lot of questions to be asked. So I think it will take us longer than that, but how much longer, we're not really sure.
It is a regulatory process. So
yeah, it is.
Yep.
It is, but it has a substantially different risk profile. And it's not like we haven't had multiple pre-submissions with the submission meetings with the FDA. We're pretty familiar with what they want. We're just trying to execute on it.
Speaking of the FDA, we just the other day saw a mandated recall of the Tandem device because of a problem with their software.
Yep.
How do regulators think about pump controls, and how have you guys designed your device, for the best way to be used?
So the pumping hardware itself doesn't require human trials. To date, the algorithms to manage automated insulin delivery do require human trials after you get on the market. And so there's a lot of effort that goes into those. There's a lot of effort that goes into integrating with CGMs, although now there's a standard programming language called ACE, which makes it easier to pair easily with a CGM. And this is a good opportunity for me to say, even though we've chosen to make our pumping interface much, much simpler than the other guys, there's nothing inside the mechanics of our device that makes us less capable in terms of our ability to pump accurately and safely and to interface with other devices. We have Bluetooth, we have NFC, we pulse every 30 seconds, they pulse every 5 minutes. So we have significant advantages and certainly no technical disadvantages relative to them in terms of delivering great care. So back to your question, how does the FDA think about these algorithms and these integrations? One, they require human testing. Two, they require a lot of cybersecurity testing because they are afraid that a hacker might take over your phone and kill you by dumping the insulin into you. And they're also very concerned that an automatic systems update might brick your pump, which is why when you have a cell phone that's integrated with a pump, they insist currently that they approve both the operating system that it runs on, the handset itself, to make sure there's no unexpected compatibility issues, and that the apps never update. So that phone that you have gradually stops working over time. And because they insist on approving the individual handset, you can count on the handset not being one that's latest and greatest. So that iPhone 15 Pro that you have might become a Samsung S11. Which isn't appealing to every customer. In fact, it's probably not appealing. It's probably unappealing to a lot of customers. So that's, look, there are always going to be these recalls of algorithms and other stuff. And, at the end of the day, we can integrate all of that, but our reason to be, our advantage is in our hardware. It's in the cost of our hardware, it's in the safety of our hardware, and it's in the form factor that our hardware comes in. And that's where we tried to innovate in a way that the other guys just haven't done in a really long time. And so, even if, regardless of whether or not you think the app on your phone or the algorithm that's dictating your insulin delivery is a Dexcom, Abbott, Apple Health, Google Health 5 years from now, Livongo, who knows, you're still going to need something on your body delivering insulin. Maybe delivering other drugs as well. And, we do have a version of our product, a second generation version of our product that can carry multiple drugs. So in basically the same form factor. So we think that there is always going to be a place for someone who has the safest, most affordable, most attractive form factor on the patient's body. And that's really where we sit and where we think our competitive advantage is.
Hey, a real quick question for you. Certainly when I think about small entrepreneurial medtech companies, I think a lot of times the founders of these companies think of them as their babies. And how do you and Paul look at the company, and is this a baby, or how should we think about it like you think about it?
Well, that's a very polite and nice way of saying it, Roger. As far as baby, I usually describe it at that, you'll often encounter founders in any area of technology or medicine who want to hold on to their idea with all 10 bony fingers because they think it's the only good idea they're ever going to have. And that is not the case here. Look, we're very passionate about this. We want people with diabetes to get better care, and we feel that access to technology, more access to technology, will help a lot of people. But at the end of the day, we want to do what's right for the asset and what's right for the shareholders. And that's certainly my attitude. And fortunately, it's Paul's attitude too, because obviously he was the founder of Tandem and ended up leaving there. Then he started another company called Modular Medical that was sold to 3M, nothing to do with diabetes, by the way, but another med device that was sold to 3M right after clearance. And now he's doing this. And I assure you, if the right offer was on the table, or the right opportunity for us to exit with a good return for the shareholders and the right risk reward for us, Paul would go off and find another good thing to do for people. And I think that's generally our attitude. There's no one sitting at the table making the decision as to sell, hold, or other that doesn't have the shareholders' best interests at heart. And that's unusual.
Right. And you guys are all large shareholders as well.
Yes. Paul, I think, is the third or fourth largest shareholder still. And obviously Manchester, the fund that I run, is the largest. And we participated in we were 10% of the last deal that was done in February.
As we get close to the end, obviously besides artificial intelligence, which is the buzzword today, the other big one out there in Medland is GLP-1s. How do you view them, and are they a threat or are they an opportunity from your standpoint?
So If pumps were 98% penetrated, then I would say they would be a little bit of a threat in terms of the growth of the market, because there's no question that putting a lot more people on GLP-1s will slow the rate of decline of the functioning of your endocrine system, and that ends up pushing you onto being on a pump as a type 2. Type 1s, GLP-1s are not approved for type 1, so the impact on that market will be negligible. However, given that 8 out of 10 people who should be wearing a pump aren't wearing a pump, there's plenty of room for growth here even if the demographic growth slows. So unfortunately, if you require daily insulin, taking a GLP-1 might reduce, but will not eliminate your need to take prandial insulin in virtually every case. So if your pancreas doesn't function and produce insulin anymore, GLP-1s, are a help, but not a cure-all. I would say the other thing is, as I mentioned, we have a dual chamber pump. You can do lots of things with a dual chamber pump, and one of them you could certainly do is you could potentially add a second drug like a GLP-1 if there was a benefit to having that in a pump form factor. And frankly, I just haven't seen, none of the current GLP-1s are all long-acting injections. No one, except for Byetta, which was the original one, which required an injection, I think 3 or 4 times a day. But it was an immediate release formulation based on a desert lizard's venom. Anyway, but so the short answer is there might be a benefit if we discover that the nausea, GI side effects, and other negative things that happen with GLP-1s that cause something like historically 70% of patients to drop off them within 2 years, if those become issues, or if those are issues for a percentage of people, and there was some way for us to alleviate that by delivering them in a pump. But look, that's speculation, and that has not yet been proven out. So the short answer, but the really short answer is, although I could spend another hour talking about GLP-1s, is that we think there's plenty of greenfield here for us in the almost pumpers market, people that clearly need better insulin delivery no matter what, that, GLP-1s are kind of an issue outside of our scope of initial business.
Right. Well, as I think we are out of time. So any concluding thoughts? I think we've had a good discussion here.
No, I think it's been a great discussion, and I just say if you want a more linear picture of the story, there's plenty. I've done plenty of these online where you'll actually see me flip through the deck, and we have the deck on our website, so you can just look at it and see this in a very sequential, simple way. But look, these are great questions, and I think I think there's a big opportunity here for us, and there's whether or not it's commercialization, acquisition, or the market just simply valuing us as a credible player in the market, we think there's a lot of upside for investors.
Very good. Jeb, thank you for your time today. We greatly appreciate it. To anybody out there who is not already signed up for a one-on-one, again, please send me an email at weiss@lythampartners.com, or again, visit www.lythampartners.com/spring2024 and click on the one-on-one meeting request button. We hope you all enjoy the conference. Thank you.